respected Bhikkhu, Bhikkhuni, and in Dhamma friend, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the organizing committee for providing us with this valuable opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas related to the theme of 11th Sakadita Conference in Vietnam Eminent Buddhist Women. To be honest, we did heritage a lot when we decided to present a paper on career of Bhikkhuni Newton. I feel grateful when praising her as an eminent Bhikkhuni, as being a modest person without desire for health and fame. She did not allow us to do so through her life. Since the time is limited, I'm going to present only main point my paper. If you want more information, please have a look at the screen, or you can read my full paper in the book. The paper studies the world of Bhikkhuni Newton and explains the Bhikkhuni who was her entire life to teach the Dhamma to have liberated human beings from suffering. Happily, her actions are magnified by successive generations. At present, the doctor of the Buddha through our are making great strides in many different fields. In Vietnam, the leadership quality of Bhikkhuni Newton has trouble in Vietnam Bhikkhuni Sangha truth. Difficult time to raise achieve and right future. This prince at eminent of Bhikkhuni who was a very humble person. For his best effort, Bhikkhuni Newton has not desired for wealth and fame. In fact, she did not allow us praise. From the time to Bhikkhuni Sangha was formerly Bhikkhuni Newton demonstrates her leadership capacity by initial various organizing at large scale. The implication of not only important for equal rights between monks and nuns, but also encourage and enhance the capacity of all Bhikkhuni to educate others and shine light the Dhamma, remove darkness and others everywhere. The 20th and 9th session of Bhikkhuni Sangha Regulation clearly sets forth an organizing objective and this discipline that every Bhikkhuni, Vietnamese Bhikkhuni is expected to follow at the on time. Large nunneries such as the Nghiêm Dược Sư became explained school of Buddhist studies. They offer basic Buddhist studies, large classes, intensive summer retreat courses, and on toward the objective mentioned above. In addition, Bhikkhuni Newton serves as receptor for the 15 ordination ceremony between 1946 and 1998. In line with Think Over a Day Not Work is Day Without Food. At Abbas Temple was encouraged to become self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency is important for two reasons. First, to have the non understand hardships in time in making a living, so they would be thirsty and grateful to their honor. And second, to help the non become independent so that they did not have independent on others and could consult of virtues like equilibrium, nunnery, self-sufficiency in special stress. The enterprise, the nunnery began veteran restaurant, soya sauce production center, a Buddhist tailor shop, sutra publication center, restaurant, production center are still functioning today and generate suffering income to insane products, support and send of the temple and society welfare activities. These efforts and self-suffering develop natural from the inside that independent on Bhikkhu Sangha business. The Bhikkhuni community if the nun always asking for from Bhikkhu Sangha, and they will become developed and lose their capacity of misair affair. Bhikkhuni Newton said, Bhikkhuni living in truth, Buddha Dhamma has opportunity to open my mind. Reverence the light of Dhamma makes it brighter with grace in its merits. Each word is in the spirit and have heard spoken Bhikkhu Tape2, who professed that Bhikkhuni should take up carriage works, exercise on defense, and live teach Dhamma to Bhikkhu. Bhikkhuni politely but strongly stated that Bhikkhuni is quick to take up both tasks. Those bhikkhuni who have capacity to teach can teach, and bhikkhuni who has capacity to do charity work can do charity work. Today, bhikkhuni are to teach Dhamma as various temple and as my Buddhist school. They on all obey a grateful fruit of bhikkhuni Newton, both temple and their charity organizations still reserve and their suffering and authority. Buddhism is religion or practice, not just theory. Bhikkhuni Newton advised to Bhikkhuni go and call with her practice and daily life. She was best known for her strict discipline, a model of solemnity and vicious conduct, such as space. Her disciples feel research all present, afraid of making mistakes, yes, a spirit and equality were evidence in the way she stepped on Dhamma practitioner and seeker equality without discrimination. On my space and our least compassion and concern for the suffering of less fortunate. She taught great compassion in sense and simple words. Consider and greatness and other as your own. Consider all and other as your own. Look into the heart of other and realize your humanity in the same. Once I heard a story about the outbreak of George long ago at Haisong Temple. Everybody in the pagoda were impressed. One nun was so seriously impressed that she was a comer. Close to the death, Bhikkhuni Newton was impressed but without concern herself. Took care of dangerously is nun throughout the night without sleeping. The next day, the nun regains consciousness and effort also records perhaps as result of sinus. Bhikkhuni Newton advised her disciple to have expansive attitude, not just concerns on their liberation. To practice the ways the Bodhisattva one must have shown it. Take the Bodhisattva words. The practice good conduct, which means practice the simple paramita. Throughout her life, Bhikkhuni Newton was single means at the practice the way of the Bodhisattva by cultivating of this species of Bodhisattva behavior. Generosity, ethical conduct, patience, joy, efforts, concentration, and wisdom. In her practice, she not only gives faith and charity, but she also gives Dhamma teaching, opened the Buddhist school, and compile and translates numerous books and Dhamma both in future generations. Despite her strict and slim and outward appearance, she offers protection to the distressed and homeless from a compassionate heart. Her ethical conduct was reflected in her practice of the precept, both major and minor, as she presides over Obasata ceremony and set a silent example. Bhikkhuni Newton practice and patience and also exemplary, overcoming gain and loss, love and heart, honor, dishonor, praise and blame, and the man of people. She patiently cultivated her Buddhist activities. Her joyful efforts were incomparable. She forgets herself completely, her works and restored the night. Overseeing the context of temple, she forgot it at all sleep. Although she did not have time to go into resist, her power of concentration was deep. She practiced profound meditation without distraction. Attachment also appeared peaceful and concerned. We saw Christ's love for an understanding of Paramita Sutta could be said that effort and attain wisdom of listening, active planning and cultivating. She has not spent standing of teaching Dhamma, made wise decision and left Bhikkhu community affectionately. Despite Bhikkhuni Newton Bodhicitta and deep expression because human lifespan is limited. A lifetime of practice Dhamma was not long enough for efforts of come actively on her inspiration. She has take a raised temple with space for Bhikkhuni Sangha to study and practice in peaceful natural environment. She selects land of Tao Phung Mountain in Vũng Tàu. On land belong to Hai Vung Temple. She called her experience is on raised Bhikkhuni Sangha. The stone stair is still there as waiting. The Buddha horn of Hai Vung Temple has yet restored because of 81 years old. For the praise ceremony of Valukitesvara Varahon was performed and her health reduced its level. A concern in Vũng Tàu for people to practice Pure Land has not yet been contested. Under this race, inspiration has not been fulfilled. Practice the way of the Bodhisattva is not stage for a mere 2 or 3 leaves. Bhikkhuni Newton often concerns us, don't worry, I return, I fulfill my aspiration, and I mentioned in practicing the way of Bodhisattva. I will give Dhamma talk and meditation talk. Vihara built monastery for monks and nuns, established a temple for lay people, and have space stream Dhamma was established. So this report will her expression. Highly devoted to Dhamma, strategy of sharing the Buddha teaching to liberate sentient being is not accident. No ordinary person could achieve so much and lead such delightful legacy for success generation. In present, Buddhist women are making great strides in various fields around the world. Sakadita is a typical example. Like a rage orchestra, these mirrors organizing go to form, play to display a long history epics of Buddhist women and make now the capacity and contribution and doctor of the Buddha in the world community. Elimination, resistance, and discrimination past and present. In this way, the Buddhist tradition will become stronger and Bhikkhuni together bring the light, the Dhamma to eliminate darkness of ignorance for the benefit on human being. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have a change here. We've added a person to our panel. She's actually not here, but her paper will be read by a friend. This is Haeson Sunim, who joined the monastic life in 1985 and practices at the Hamaung Sonwon in Korea under the tutelage of Son Master Daecheng. She received a PhD in Buddhist Studies from Dongguk University in 2006. It was a dissertation on the Hanmaung teaching and Son practice method. Oh, it is page 212.
Mountains have played important roles in the history of Korean Buddhism. The close connection between Korean Buddhism and mountains is easily attested by the convention of affiliating a monastery with a major peak in its vicinity. The mountain, in fact, is often referred to as part of the name of the temple, For instance, Unmunsa is often called Hogosan Unmunsa, which can be literally translated as the Cloud Gate Temple in the Crouching Tiger Mountain. The historical tie between Buddhism and mountains is especially strong in the Korean Sun tradition. The beginnings of Korean Sun goes back to the 9th to 10th centuries, when the so-called 9 mountain Sun sects were established in various parts of the unified Silla kingdom. Each of the 9 schools of Sun was distinctly named after a prominent mountain. Some of these temples still function as the regional centers of Sun practice. While this convention of naming may have emerged under the influence of Chinese Buddhism, its continued practice across the Korean peninsula reflects the predominantly mountainous terrain of the country. The importance of mountains in Korean monastic practice is increased dramatically during the Joseon dynasty, which enforced a strong anti-Buddhist policy. Forests, cliffs, and valleys provided a haven for monks and nuns who were displaced from town centers and who made a vital contribution to the survival of Buddhism in Confucian Joseon society. As ritual-based Koryo Buddhism shifted to meditation-centered Sun in Joseon, rugged natural environments served as ideal monastic practice sites. From the combination of these geographical and historical conditions emerged the popular Korean expression Ipsan, literally entering a mountain, which came to connote joining monastic life. The term equates mountain to monastery. Respectful appellations for eminent monks and nuns sometimes involve specific mountains with which they are affiliated. Master Songcheol, for instance, is described as a tiger of Mountain Kaya, and Bhiksuni Inhong is similarly nicknamed the Tigress of Mountain Kaji. Mountains are generally associated with male rather than female practitioners. This tendency raises critical questions as to the significance of mountains in a practice tradition relevant to Buddhist nuns. In this paper, I will examine the patterns and meanings of mountain practice for female monastics in contemporary Korea. First, I will present a brief explanation of some of the common forms of practice set in mountains. Next, I will discuss specific cases of mountain practice pursued by Bhiksunis Bongong and Daeheng, respectively. By showcasing the role of mountains as a potent setting for spiritual training, the two nuns' experiences powerfully challenge the concept of a male-dominated tradition of ascetic practice in Korean Sun. One of the most popular forms of mountain practice in Korean Buddhism is an intensive prayer session. As with monks, Korean nuns prefer a remote mountain hermitage to a large urban temple when they devote themselves to prayer for a fixed period of time. The duration of such a session can range from a few months to several years. Since tranquility is crucial in this practice, monks and nuns favor a small, secluded place off the beaten trail. Contrasted with a prayer session, the practice of unsu hengak, wandering like a cloud and water, sends monastics on the road, as indicated by the Korean phrase. When summer and winter retreats end, a number of monks and nuns travel to visit eminent Sun masters in faraway places. In olden times, such spiritual teachers were located in the mountains. Although the industrialization and urbanization of the country have changed the monastic topography, many renowned teachers still tend to stay away from large temples that are crowded with tourists. Itinerant practice traditions in Korean Buddhism, such as these, have fostered a rich monastic lore of a spiritual breakthrough experienced by monks and nuns on their path to awakening. The legendary story of Bhiksuni Bongong's encounter with Manjushri is one such case. This incident took place in the winter of 1937 when Bhiksuni Bongong, accompanied by 2 other Bhikshunis, Daehyun and Seongyong, was on her way up to Sangwonsa Temple on Mountain Ode to visit Master Hanam. The steep mountain roads were all covered with heavy snow, and the 3 nuns were completely lost in the valley. They were desperately searching for the right direction to reach the temple when a white puppy suddenly appeared and led them all the way up to the entrance to Sangwonsa Temple. As the three nuns were approaching the temple gate, the puppy disappeared in the same mysterious way that it had appeared. When they reported the strange incident to Master Hanam later, he said, quote, "Faith can overcome any type of ordeal. That white puppy was not a puppy, but a manifestation of Bodhisattva Manjushri," unquote. Deeply inspired by this experience, Bongong later built a meditation hall for nuns in Mountain Ode named Jijangap, Hermitage of Kushtagarbha. This hall has housed many forceful sun nuns each retreat season. This anecdote illustrates a familiar pattern of mysterious encounters in Korean Buddhist lore. The mountains in winter are viewed as the ultimate space for Buddhist monastic practice. This idea is derived from the 6 years of ascetic practice undertaken by the Buddha. The place where the Buddha stayed for 6 years was actually a forest. In Korea, however, many biographies of the Buddha present the site of his intense meditation as a snow mountain in the Himalayas. Hence, this phase of his life is typically referred to as the period of Seolsan Goheng, ascetic practice in the snow mountains. Because the Buddha attained enlightenment at the end of this period, mountains are regarded not just as spiritually auspicious places, but also as the penultimate space for meditative attainment. While the majority of well-known stories of mountain practice are related to monks, a remarkable instance of female asceticism can be found in Bhikshuni Daeheng's decade-long retreat in the wilderness. Daeheng's inclination to stay in nature developed early in her childhood. She recollects that she spent much of her time outside the home, her family home, which suffered both politically and economically under the Japanese colonial forces due to her father's service in the Korean army. After the house was confiscated by the Japanese military government, Daeheng, although she was quite young, became homeless spiritually as well as physically. This exposure to unfamiliar environments drove the precocious young girl to ask herself fundamental existential questions such as where she came from and why people suffered so much from hunger and diseases. Daeheng renounced household life in 1950. Soon after she received the Shramanarika precepts, she retreated to the mountains. Wandering through Gangwon and Gyeonggi provinces and the Seoul area, Daeheng's itinerant meditation in the open air continued for 4 years. As could be expected, she ran into all kinds of life-threatening situations on the road, including the Korean War and its aftermath. This was a time when strong anti-communist sentiment swept South Korea. Consequently, she was sometimes bullied and beaten by strangers and even arrested by the police, who suspected her to be a North Korean spy because of her strange loitering in the woods. Daeheng's 4 years of wandering was followed by another 6 years of practice on Mount Chiak. This time she stayed in a small hut near Sangwonsa Temple. Daeheng's extended mountain practice finally came to an end in the early 1960s when she felt that, quote, the time was right to settle down, unquote. Several salient features can be noted in the course of Daeheng's life in the wilderness. Above all, there were gender-specific challenges in her life as an itinerant female practitioner. As a way of protecting herself, she had to soil her face and body with a dirty clay that made her skin crack and bleed terribly in the cold weather. Given her repulsive appearance, indifference to clothing, and total immersion in her own inner world, it is not surprising that she was treated as a wandering mad woman. Once a question arose in her mind, Daeheng just stopped on the spot and stayed there for days and nights together until she found an answer. When she felt hungry, she ate whatever quote-unquote leaves and grasses.
Long, but I know that we in our Buddhist practice are always cultivating flexibility. So I think we can stay to hear from the Venerable Tenzin Palmo. Yes, we're staying to hear from her. Thank you. And her bio alone could take half an hour to recite. I will only say, when I think of her, my heart opens. She is inspiration and sister to all of us here.
Good morning, everybody. I want to speak this morning briefly on a very important figure in the Tibetan Buddhism in exile. My talk is called Mamila, The Life and Accomplishment of Frida Bedi, but it's not in your book, so don't look. So one of the complaints raised by women in contemporary Buddhist circles, especially perhaps in the West, is the paucity of inspiring accounts of modern female practitioners. But of course here now we've been hearing about so many of them, and this is indeed very inspiring. But anyway, it was my privilege to have known an example of a very inspiring practitioner in Frida Bedi, who later became known as Bhikshuni Karma Kechop Palmo. So it's very sad that although she only died in the 70s, the modern generation usually do not know anything about her. Frida Bedi, Frida was born in February of 1911 in Derbyshire, England, to a middle-class family named Holston. So she was called Frida Holston. She was a bright and ambitious girl who attended Oxford University. Now, in her day, this is in the early 1900s, this was quite an accomplishment, since very few women were given the opportunity for higher education in those days. Apparently, she had helped a friend to study for the entrance exam to Oxford, and then decided to sit for the entrance exam herself, and she passed. Her friend didn't pass, but she passed. And so she was studying for a degree in economics when she met a fellow student named Baba Pare Lal Bedi, who was a scion of a notable Punjabi Sikh family that traced his ancestry back to Guru Nanak, who is the founder of the Sikh tradition. The young students fell in love and, despite opposition from both families, determined to marry. You must understand, these are the early days in the 1930s in England, when India was still under the British Raj, and so for a middle-class, well-educated girl to actually want to marry an Indian was considered very shocking, both to the Brits and to the Indians. Anyway, Frida told me that on account of their marital plans, there was a debate in the British Parliament aimed at banning mixed-race marriages. However, this motion was vetoed. During her time at Oxford, Frida had the opportunity to listen to both Mahatma Gandhi, who had visited there in 1931, and Rabindranath Tagore, who was another great Indian figure. Both of these figures, in their own unique ways, were deeply involved in the Indian movement to gain independence from the British colonial rule. In the 1930s, Frida and Bedi returned to India, where they stayed for a while with Baba's traditional family. Later, Frida became a professor of English at a girls' college in Lahore, in what is now Pakistan. Both Frida and Baba were involved in Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha movement, that's holding to truth their freedom independence movement for independence. And both Frida and Baba were imprisoned by British authorities for their activities in leading demonstrations and so forth. Frida later wrote an account of her life in India and her days in jail, entitled Behind Mud Walls. Following Indian independence in 1947, Frida Bedi went to work for the Indian government under Jawaharlal Nehru. In 1952, she was sent on a United Nations mission to Burma. She was enchanted by the country and by its Buddhist culture, and she was fortunate to have the opportunity to study Vipassana meditation under the great meditation masters Mahasi Sayadaw and Sayadaw Utitala. During this time, her younger son, Kabir Bedi, who later became a film actor, received temporary ordination as a novice monk. In 1959, about 80,000 or 100,000 refugees escaped from Tibet and settled in India and Nepal. In the beginning, many of these refugees stayed in Misamari camp in Assam, which is very hot and steamy, state on the northeastern border of India. So the refugees arrived traveling for weeks and months over high Himalayan mountain passes with little food and no road maps. At the camp in Misamari, they found themselves in completely alien country, crowded together in extremely hot and unsanitary conditions. Many quickly succumbed to diseases such as dysentery, TB, and malaria. The weeks and months in the camps were filled with frequent deaths, and many of the refugees wondered whether their sufferings would ever end. Finally, Frida Bedi, who was working for the Central Indian government, was dispatched to Misamari to sort out the chaos in the camps and to start organizing an evacuation. Among the thousands of people crowded into these camps were many eminent Buddhist lamas. And at the time, no distinctions were being made between high and low, rich and poor. Everyone in the camps was leveled by their common predicament. What is amazing is that Frida recognized many of these refugees were actually important lamas. And years later, she could still recall their names, their backgrounds, the histories of their escapes, and any interesting stories about their time in the camps. She somehow managed to see who was really, of importance there. It's remarkable that in the confusion of those days, even with no knowledge of Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, their practice and their lineages, she could still distinguish who was who. Frida had a great talent for organizing other people's lives for them. If people were undecided what to do or where to go, Mamila would arrange a connection with some distant acquaintance and help people to start a new life, often in a very unexpected direction. With such a talent, she was the perfect person to reorganize and empty the camps. Every day she interviewed an endless stream of people and arranged for them to be sent to friends or families in other towns of India, such as Kalimpong and Darjeeling. Over the years, I've met so many lamas and lay people who fondly remember Frida coming to their camps and finally arranging their transfer to more moderate climates. At some point in those days, Frida met His Holiness the Gyalwa Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa. Apparently, she was urged to meet him by Appa Pant, an Indian diplomat, and as a result became his devoted student. In 1962, Frida founded the Young Lamas Home School in Delhi. She had the incredible foresight to see that Buddhism would become a worldwide phenomenon. Please understand, in those days, nobody knew anything about Tibetan Buddhism. There was almost no books on it, there were no lamas in the West, and it was a completely unknown territory. Personally, at that time, I thought that Tibetan Buddhism was too exotic, esoteric, and complex to ever gain more than a limited appeal in the West. This was when Western Buddhism was really still quite staid and orthodox, and it was before the hippie era of the late 60s and 70s, when everybody was high on LSD and fell in love with colorful tantric visualizations. However, Frida believed that the Tibetan tradition of Vajrayana Buddhism would spread in the West, and the people to transmit it there would be the tulkus, the incarnate lamas, since they had been trained from early childhood to become Dharma teachers. In order to preach the Dharma, these young lamas would need to know English. since this is a global language, as we know. But it was no use simply to send these young boys to English medium schools, since they also needed to be trained in Buddhist philosophies and ritual. Recognizing this, Frida founded her own institute called the Young Lamas Home School, where young incarnate lamas of all the lineages could stay and study with learned professors of their own traditions, and at the same time they could learn English from any backpacking Western volunteer, including Allen Ginsberg, who happened to turn up. The school began in Delhi with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Akong Rinpoche among the first students. Within a year or so, this school was transferred to the cooler climate of Dalhousie, a quiet Himalayan hill station in what was then the Punjab. In early 1964, I went to Dalhousie as a volunteer, and for the next few months, I was Frida's secretary, as well as English teacher for the beginners class. Lama Sopa Rinpoche was also a pupil at that time. In addition to this school for privileged Tulkus, Frida also founded the first Buddhist nunnery for Tibetan refugees in India. This nunnery was later transferred to Trilokpur, where it still exists. This was 20 years before anyone else gave any thought to the plight of the nuns and began building small nunneries. Again, Frida demonstrated her prescience and her talent for being ahead of the crowd. Well, Frida was tall and by this time heavily built. When I first met her, she had very well-oiled grey hair tied back in a bun and wore a maroon sari. She had piercing blue eyes and was the quintessential memsahib. She was a real English class lady whose imperious manner quelled even high lamas. Nonetheless, she was kind and humorous and very devoted to the Dharma and to the great lamas. At this time, she was affectionately known to all as Mamila. In 1966, Frida received the novice, the Shramanarika ordination from His Holiness the 16th Gyawa Karmapa, who was living at Rumtek Monastery in Sikkim. Henceforth, she was known as Karma Kechok Palmo or Sister Palmo, and dressed in the traditional robes of a nun. In 1972, Kechok Palmo went to Hong Kong and became one of the first English women to receive the Bhikshuni ordination. Again, she demonstrated her foresight in taking what was then an unusual step. Around this time, Karma Kechok Palmo moved to Rumtek Monastery, where she assisted Gyalwang Karmapa in his various projects, and also translated some basic prayers and practices into English. She was instrumental in arranging for His Holiness Gyawa Karmapa to be invited to the West, especially to the United States, and accompanied him on his first visit there. In addition, she visited South Africa to spread the Dharma, and she's still very fondly remembered in South Africa. In those days, very few books on Tibetan Buddhism had been reliably translated into English, and very few lamas spoke fluent English. As a result, studying the Dharma was a challenge for Westerners, and especially for women who were traditionally overlooked and disregarded by the tradition. One reason Kechok Palmo was so wonderful was that no one ever overlooked her. Indeed, most lamas were somewhat in awe of her. She was not accustomed to being subservient and was usually the one to give the orders. And of course, by this time, she was already an older woman, and this made her dominance more socially acceptable. But she was also great fun and a gold mine of information about Tibetan lamas. Kechok Palmo spent several years as the only woman in residence at Rumtek Monastery. There she was close to the Gyalwang Karmapa and many high incarnate lamas who were studying at Rumtek in those days. She spent her time in retreat and doing translation work. She was definitely a pioneer, directly influencing the lives of many lamas in that earlier generation who contributed to the establishment of the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition in the West. Khejo Phamo passed away in March 1977. It is said that she has been reborn as the daughter of Beru Khense Rinpoche, a Karma Kagyu Lama. This may be the only occasion a Westerner taking rebirth as a Tibetan tulku, as opposed to Tibetan Lamas being reborn as Westerners. A while ago, Khejo Phamo's eldest son wrote to me suggesting that his mother's biography be written down and published. I recommended various possible authors, and eventually Vicky Mackenzie was selected as most suitable. Vicky has written several biographies of Buddhist teachers and is the author of my own biography, Cave in the Snow. The Beatty family has meanwhile backtracked and prevaricated, but I have encouraged Vicky to proceed with the biography anyway. The main problem is financial backing for the background research which needs to be done for the project. If Sister Palmer's life history is not recorded soon, those who knew her will have passed on and her fascinating story will be lost. She played such an integral part in the early narrative of the Tibetan refugee experiences in India that her contribution needs to be remembered. Far too many accomplished Buddhist women have been lost to memory because their stories were never written down. We sincerely hope that such a fate does not await such an extraordinary and important Dharma practitioner as Khejo Phamo. Thank you.
So I think we have started the year right. It's quite a splendid panel. Thank you all so much. So on our schedule here, it says small group discussions. I don't have other information here. I think people by this time know where to go. They should stay here for question and answer after. So let's take a small break and come back for question and answer to the panelists. So the panel will return. Okay?
Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật.
Before starting the question answer session, we would like to repeat the topics that have been presented this morning. The first topic is Pishuni Tahata Fashi, the first Bhikkhu Pravaru Pavagadi from India. The third paper, Heart Applied Anagarika Dhammadina by Miss Shirley Johannesson from Canada. The fourth paper, A Polar Star Among Vietnamese Nuns, Bhikshuni Như Thanh by Venerable Social Engagement, Transforming Sentient Beings by Miss Ye Song Jeong from Korea. These are the topics that we will have for the question and answer topic. Thank you.
Dạ, chúng con kính mời chư tôn đức và quý đại biểu đặt câu hỏi. Câu hỏi có thể quý đức thì giờ một lần nữa chúng con kính mời chư đại biểu đặt câu hỏi.
Please take your seat. I think that there are some empty seats in the front.
Quý đại biểu chúng ta ngồi xích lên để cho hội trường không bị loạn ạ. Dạ, mời quý vị ngồi xích lên để hội trường không bị loạn ạ. Xin cảm ơn ạ. Phối rất mong những câu hỏi của quý vị đại biểu. Và nếu câu hỏi được hỏi bằng tiếng Anh thì sẽ có thông dịch viên dịch đến cho ban điều phối hiểu.
Một nữ tu tên là Thammadina. Bài thứ tư nói về ni trưởng Thích Nữ Như Thanh của Việt Nam. Bài thứ
I'm the Venerable Jongwan from South Korea, and I want to ask something to the Venerable. I'm very sorry I forgot your Buddhist name, and I want to ask to the Venerable
Dhammananda.
Yes,
Dhammananda
yeah.
from Thailand.
Dạ.
Yes.
It is hard to explain, to establish and continue our Bhikkhuni Sanghas, Korean Bhikkhuni Sangha in our Korean society during last century. It is really hard to say our Korean elders to continue our Bhikkhuni Sangha in my society. So we young venerables always appreciate to, and we really honor, respect to our Korean elder venerables. So, and I'm also thank you to your how can I say, you're trying to establish the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Thai society. So I want to and any other suggestion for the establishing other Bhikkhuni Sangha society, like for international expansion.
Khuyên nào?
No, now we get very excited about women can be ordained in Theravada tradition. I am beginning to be worried because ordination alone does not help. Before ordination, there must be a great training in the Buddhist teaching, training in the Buddhist practice. If we are grounded, very firmly rooted in the practice and in the study, then the next one come, then we can defend Buddhism. Yes, so for the young, I'm already third generation. My grandmother was a Mechi. My mother was a Bhikkhuni, and this is already the third generation. So I would like to pass on the candle to you also. That number one, you have to study Buddhism very thoroughly. Number two, practice. These two go together. Buddhism is not about study. Buddhism must be about practice. And only then we can be the true spirit of the Buddha.
Câu trả lời của sư cô Dhammananda rằng việc thọ giới tỳ kheo ni là một việc quan trọng, nhưng mà quan trọng hơn chính là việc đào tạo một người ni.
Wait for the afternoon. In the afternoon at 3 o'clock, we are going to have 2 hours to discuss about this particular topic. So please have a little patience.
Sư cô Dhammananda thưa với ngài rằng là xin ngài kiên nhẫn chờ cho đến buổi chiều, vì chiều hôm nay từ 3 giờ tới 5 giờ suốt 2 tiếng đồng hồ sẽ có một cái phần thảo luận đặc biệt về đề tài là việc thọ giới tỳ kheo ni cho nữ tu ở các nước.
Need for a son, because that's how Chinese family think. They prefer sons over daughter. I was wondering how that affects you and whether you felt, how that affects you. The fact that she was disappointed that you're a daughter and whether you felt the same. But in any case, in your case, you have 3 sons. So, yeah.
Câu buồn phiền của cha mẹ như vậy có ảnh hưởng gì đến cô hay không?
I think in my mother's generation, both in Vietnam as well as in many Asian countries, they always wanted sons. And that when I was born during the wartime, I was her only child and happened to be a daughter. So she was very disappointed. So I grew up not knowing whether I would like to be a man or a woman.
Sư cô nói rằng thế hệ của mẹ.
I would like to tell you that in my next life, I will be born a woman again and again.
Nhưng mà bây giờ sau khi đã có những cái hoạt động cho quyền lợi của người nữ, đặc biệt là những nữ tu ở Thái Lan, thì sư cô đã có một quyết định rằng là sư cô sẽ tái sinh lại làm người nữ trong kiếp sau và những kiếp sau nữa, vì để đấu tranh cho quyền lợi của người nữ.
And again, to work for the cause of Bhikkhuni establishment.
Và để phấn đấu làm sao cho những người nữ ở các nước Phật giáo Theravada được thọ giới tỳ kheo ni.
Chưa tới được Việt Nam rồi. Tới là mình thấy rồi.
Thank you very much, Venerable. There is so one last question.
We have a lay sangha which is growing steadily, and we have a lot of good women, but they are not known outside of the Netherlands, and they are not bhikkhunis. And I was wondering how to also encourage us, as one of the panelists asked yesterday, I think, or the day before, to write and document the lives of women, whether bhikkhuni or lay women, and whether Sakyadita would be interested in starting an archive or something where we could give articles so that the lives of lay women who are transmitting the Dharma and helping to teach the Dharma can also be documented. Thank you.
Excuse me, where are you from?
I would like to suggest, as a first step in that direction, that you, at the next Shakyadita, that you propose and write a paper and deliver it about the women in your own country who are doing this kind of thing. That's a beginning, and we go on from there. It would be nice if Shakyadita could publish a series of monographs, that would be distributed, and maybe that's something we can think about at the end.
Thì ý kiến của cô người điều phối chương trình hôm nay thì cô nói rằng là nhóm đó nên viết một lá thư ghi lại cái hiện trạng của mình và yêu cầu của mình.
Thanh điều trọn thành phân đạo, cung thỉnh chư tôn thiền đức và quý đại biểu Quan Lâm trai đường để thọ trai, trân trọng cảm ơn và kính chào chư.